Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So today I want to talk about home lab network monitoring. And the foundation of any home lab environment is a properly configured and documented network. And I know right now what you're thinking is, documented? Are you kidding? Well, so Incus and LXD containers that I feature on the channel all the time are really excellent low resource consumption isolated virtual instances. And so consequently, we have lots of them. And isolation simplifies maintenance and also increases your security, makes things easier to back up, and so on down the line. There really are so many good things to say about operating in LXC, LXD, Incus, and even Docker. So the problem that results is that you have lots and lots of containers, which means lots of network server nodes. And particularly if you've been following this channel, where I kind of advocate taking your Incus instances and your LXD instances and bridging them to the main LAN. So how do you keep track of all of this? Well, I have a list of things which I really consider to be best practices. I use Incus containers bridged to my main LAN, and also some are bridged to my VLANs. And I centralize address management on the router with DHCP address reservations. And that's a good thing too, because it gives you one place to manage all of your addresses, as opposed to setting up static addresses on every single one of your operating system instances, which can get really laborious. So I use a product called NetAlertX, which is a fork of PyAlert, which was started in January of 2023. And NetAlertX, as you're about to see, is a really great program. So NetAlertX discovers all of your network instances, and it does so by using address resolution package scans. And it also uses NSLOOKUP to look up your server names. And then it logs and tracks all of these nodes that it's found on your network by MAC address and also by IP address. And they also log lots of other information that can be discovered. So NetAlertX can send alerts via configured publishers via a variety of push notification services. And what are we going to do today in this tutorial? Well, I'm going to install and configure NetAlertX to watch a home lab environment network. And then I'm going to show how to install and configure the Apprise server, which allows you to configure or send push notifications to just about every available notification server, even including email if so desired, even if the service wasn't designed as an email service. So I'm going to show you how to install and configure a product called Gotify, which is a lot like NTFY or Notify. But Gotify allows you to send and receive notifications via WebSockets. And there's even a Gotify client for the Android operating system, so you can have one running mobilely. And I also believe that there is an iGotify instance for iOS, but I'm not an iOS person, so I have not tested it. So finally, we're going to configure NetAlertX to send its notifications via Apprise to your Gotify instance. So we'll be basically installing a NetAlertX instance, a Apprise instance, and a Gotify instance. And so this is an excellent way to track when network events occur on your home lab. So to start with here, I want to show you that I do run an instance of Uptime Kuma. And I really don't have anything bad to say about Uptime Kuma. It runs very reliably and does signal when particular nodes are up and down, and you have lots of other settings. I've never really liked its dashboard much, and to me the user interface tends to be a bit laggy. Anyway, I wanted to show you that up front just to show you that I do use Uptime Kuma, and I use Uptime Kuma's notification mechanism to talk to a private room in my Rocket Chat, and I also use it to send notifications to my Gotify instance as well. So next up here we have the NetAlertX instance. And my NetAlertX instance I've highly customized here, but you can see that it says I have 147 devices, 144 of which are connected, and I believe I've actually gone out and deleted some. I'm still kind of learning this interface because NetAlertX has an awful lot of things built into it. NetAlertX does its best to try to quantify what each individual particular node looks like. And so, for example, here VMS Mist, which happens to be one of my Incus servers, we can click on it and it will go up and say, here's its MAC address, here's its name, and then you can even fill in an owner and a type and a lot of other information. So it could be a full-fledged inventory system if so desired. And it also has the ability to run things on the remote system. I think that it probably has some kind of a script daemon. I didn't go that far because I'm really just using NetAlertX for its capability of doing monitoring. The next thing I wanted to point out is that you can go ahead and click on network here. Supposedly it will build a network diagram. I have not played with that as of yet. Under maintenance, you do have UI settings, and I have a lot of the UI elements that are actually turned off here because I didn't want to have all of the things displayed, because I think all in all there were probably somewhere around 25 columns, which is an awful lot of information. But we want to go over here to settings. And one of the things we're going to be talking about here are going to be the publishers. But up front here, you can see that there are some enabled settings for ARP scan, internet check, whether your internet is up or down, NS lookup, and then another NS lookup type of service called Folus. And then I've added in the Apprise publisher. Now, they do not have an Apprise server built into NetAlertX, and so consequently I have to configure one. And NetAlertX is a Docker application, so is Apprise, and so is Gotify. But I've decided to put them on separate machines because for maintenance, backup, snapshotting purposes, and so on, there's very little overhead to have separate Incus containers for separate Docker apps. And it just makes it a whole lot easier to not have to disrupt the world when I play with one of them. So if I go down to publishers here, you can see the only publisher I've installed so far is the Apprise publisher. And this is basically a front end to call your Apprise server. And so my particular Apprise server here is apprise.scotti-BYTE.com/notify. You have to have an API to get into that, even though it's public. The web interface you're seeing here for my NetAlertX server at network.scotti-BYTE.com is actually front-ended by Authentics. So it's got 2FA access to it and so on. But this is the Apprise publisher, and it basically says whenever there's a notification, go ahead and talk to this Apprise host, which is the host that I built up. We're going to be building one like it. I'm sending this Gotify URL over there to send a notification to it. So from there, basically, that's kind of what we have. We really don't have a lot more to say about it other than that. When a new device is discovered on the network, It will not automatically be specified as online. It'll say that it's a new device, and you can click on it and change its name, and you can go ahead and turn off the new device flag, so it's very obvious when there's a new device that's joined your network. As I go down my list here, a lot of these are containers, some of them are standalone servers, some of them are Raspberry Pis, some of them are phones and tablets and Echo devices, and I've got things on the VLAN. And in fact, if I go in and look at my settings and I look at my networks here, you can see scan subnets, and I say scan my 172.16.1.0 network, and I'm only scanning it /24 because everything that's DHCP's on that 24 server, I know that things are on the other, and I'm not really crazy about monitoring those. And then I have my 30 VLAN, which is my IoT VLAN, and I have my 80 VLAN, which happens to be my DMZ VLAN for my public services, things like the Rocket Chat and the discussion server and that sort of thing. Basically, that's where you define a lot of this, and we're going to stand up our own NetAlertX server here. The next thing is the Apprise server. So I have a separate Apprise server, and the way it works is, it apprises you of events. If you look into Apprise, it's very interesting because it basically says that you can do things from the command line. You can send a curl. It'll go ahead and send a message to somebody, and this is a specific example with my local private address and how it works. Or you can do a curl with a post if you want to send an attachment. You can also send web-based attachments as well. So it does a lot of things, and then there are all kinds of notifiers that are supported via Apprise. As a matter of fact, if we go over here to the Apprise web page, you will see that the Apprise GitHub page says to apprise somebody is to inform or tell them something. And it allows you to send notification to all of the most popular notification servers available to us. And if you scroll down in this list, it'll show you all the things it supports. Obviously, its own API. You could use Apprise to configure things to Apprise, but I didn't. And you can go down through here and you can see really all sorts of things. So there's Gotify that I'm using. And then you even have things like IFT. Apprise is very popular for Home Assistant users. You can use it to communicate with Kodi and Mailgun and Matrix and Mattermost. And you can even send MQTT, which is probably how it does it with Home Assistant. You can communicate to Nextcloud with it. Another service similar to Gotify is NTFY, and it does that. It also talks to Office 365. It talks to Signal. You go down through this list. It's just a huge list. Pushover notifications. And that brings me to another point when I see pushover here, because pushover is a public service. And a lot of times if you use pushover notifications to any extent, a lot of these services cost extra money. And they're not self-hosted. They're in the public cloud. So by using Apprise along with Gotify, I'm able to do all my alerts inside my own private network using no public cloud services whatsoever. Again, moving along down here, we've got Rocket Chat, we've got SendGrid, and we've got Slack. Telegram, it goes on and on. Zulip is another chat similar to Rocket Chat. So it supports all of those. And the final piece of the puzzle that we have here is Gotify, which is kind of like Notify. And you can see here that I have a couple of Gotify notifications that actually came in from NetAlertX. And it's saying that Scott's Pixel 7 phone was disconnected from the network, and my wife's Fire Max 11 tablet was disconnected from the network. And it tells me what their MAC addresses are, and it also tells me what their local IP addresses are. So these are really nice notifications. On the left-hand margin, I can look at all messages, which is what I'm looking at now, or specifically messages from Uptime Kuma, because I have Uptime Kuma sending messages here, although I wonder in the future if I'll really use Uptime Kuma because of everything that NetAlertX does. And then I have change notification, which is a service that looks for changes in web pages, like newer software versions that might be offered on a GitHub page, or updates to things like availability of a product on a website that might have been out of stock, or a change in a price. There's the NetAlertX, as I pointed out. And then I also have one for Apprise, and that's really just for testing, so I can send messages directly from Apprise here. So the way Gotify runs in general is that you use the concept of creating an app, and an app is only an API, and then you pass the address of your Gotify server along with this private token here, the API token, and then it goes ahead and is able to send messages to the Gotify server, and that's kind of how it works. Okay, so from here, now that we know what we're doing, let's go ahead and first of all install NetAlertX. Here I am on my Incus server, and I'm going to go ahead and create a container for NetAlertX with the command Incus launch images :Ubuntu 2404 NetAlertX, setting boot.autostart equal to true, which means that when the Incus server boots, this container will start. And then we have security.nesting equal to true because NetAlertX is a Docker application. And then we have the profile default and the profile bridge profile in order to present this container out onto my main LAN. Now that the new container is up and running, we're going to go ahead and do an Incus shell over to NetAlertX, and then we'll do an apt update && apt upgrade -y in order to update all of the repositories and take all of the upgrades and make sure it is current. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and install our dependencies, which are going to be curl, nano, net-tools, which I like to have out here, and open SSH-server in order to be able to perform maintenance on the instance in the future easily by just using SSH. Since NetAlertX is a Docker command, we're going to go ahead and install Docker from the script on the Docker website with this curl command. Next, we'll go ahead and create myself a user account with an add user Scott, and we'll give Scott a password and verify that password. Finally, since we have Docker and also a user account out here, let's go ahead and grant my user account the sudo privilege in case we need it. And then in order for us to be able to use Docker commands without the sudo command, let's go ahead and add Scott into the Docker group as well. Let's go ahead and SU over to the Scott account with an SU -- Scott, which moves over to the Scott account, and the dash moves me into Scott's home folder. If I do a pwd, you can see I'm in /home/Scott. Let's do a make dir on NetAlertX and cd into NetAlertX. I always like to create a folder for my Docker applications because it just makes them a little bit easier to install and keep track of. And very occasionally, I'll actually have more than one Docker application on the same Incus instance, but I find it easier for maintenance point of view and also backup to have separate Docker or separate Incus containers since there's very little overhead. Now we're going to go ahead and do a nano on docker-compose.yml, and then we're going to go ahead and paste in the Docker compose file here. So this is a pretty simple Docker compose file, and really it's going to create a config folder at the same level as the Docker Compose and a database folder at the same level of the Docker Compose. You can change your time zone, and here I have port 80 because since this is a dedicated Docker container, I know that port 80 is available. So I'm going to do a Control O and Enter to write the file out, and a Control X to exit the Nano editor. And at this point, I'm going to do a Docker Compose up-D, and it'll go ahead and pull the container and start it. Now that my container is started, I can verify that with the docker space ps command. And there you can see that it started about a minute ago, and it indicates that it is healthy. If I do an if config command, we'll see that ETH0 is running at 172.16.1.105. If I go up to my web browser and I access 172.16.1.105, it brings up the NetAlertX website. So this is where your work begins, because at this point it will only discover your router, and that's about it. So in order to be able to discover anything else, we're going to need to go down and look at some of the configurations. So we'll go into settings and we'll scroll down on settings, and here it has the interface, and the interface that it lists is an interface for ETH1, which is not right. It's going to be ETH0 inside of the container, and then it's doing the 192.168.1.0 network, which is not my network. So I'll go ahead and I'll put in here 172.16.0.0, and it will go ahead. Actually, I'm going to do 172.16.1 because my DHCP scope is within that range. My network's actually larger, but in terms of time, I just want to go ahead and bring this up a little quicker. So I'll go ahead and say update, and now we've updated our interface. If I go back up here and click, wait a second, I have to come down here and say save. Once you say save, it'll say that it is reloading the settings, and that takes a varying amount of time. And then we can go back up here and click at NetAlertX, and it should begin discovering systems on my subnet. So after about 5 minutes, you can see here that it says that it's found 68 devices. 67 of them are new because my router was the only device that it considered to be a regular device. And you notice here that it says name not found. Well, if we scroll down the list, most of these are going to be name not found. There are a few that are in my local DNS, like my Apprise server and my Authentic server and my Brother printer and so on, that are all in there. But there are a lot of these that are name not found, and you're going to want to go ahead and click on them. And so I've clicked on one of them here, and you're going to want to give it a name. So I could just call this thing test, not knowing what it is. And then I'm going to unclick new device, uncheck new device, which in essence says, yeah, I really know what this device is. It's on my network and it belongs here. And then I can click save. After I click save, it goes ahead and makes the change to the database. And then when I go back to the main page, I'll have this new node out here that is listed by name, but it will no longer indicate that it's new. It'll indicate that it is a currently up and running system on the network. And so now after that update was performed, you see here we have node test, and then over here it says that node test is online, whereas the other ones that we haven't gone in and edited yet still indicate that they're new, and that lets you know. And then up at the top, it'll also say how many new devices you have. And then once you have devices up there and all defined as real devices that are not new devices, then it will indicate which ones are down. You also have the option when you go to delete something, you can instead archive it if you want to remember a history of what you had previously. Maybe you archive a machine because it had a MAC address you wanted to remember, or maybe a name you wanted to remember. So those are all options within NetAlertX. So one of the main points of using this program would be to be able to have notifications. And if we go into settings and we go down here to the area called publishers, you'll notice that by default it does not have any publishers installed. At this point, if we scroll to the top of this list, we'll also see that there are no publishers listed under here as well. And there are a whole series of plugins that you can install and a long plugin list. And so the ones that are highlighted are plugins that are currently installed. We want to install the Apprise plugin, so we're going to do a control left click on Apprise, and that once we do that, we can click save. And then once it saves that setting, then we should see Apprise as one of our publishers. And now that it's finished saving, you notice you still don't see Apprise in this list of publishers up here. However, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see that it says Apprise Publisher. And if we click on that, there are several things that we're going to have to fill in order to use our Apprise system. And one of the key things is putting in the Apprise host URL, because the Apprise notifier is not a part of NetAlertX, and we're going to install that in a separate Incus container. So now back down at our command prompt, I'm going to go ahead and exit from the Scott account on the NetAlertX server, and I'm going to exit from the shell command and bring us back to the Incus server. On the Incus server, I'm going to do an Incus launch, and I'm going to use the same exact command that I did for NetAlertX, except this time the name of the container is going to be Apprise. And again, it's going to be the same exact steps that we performed for the NetAlertX container. We're just going to do an Incus shell on Apprise. Now we could install all these applications on the same Incus container, but in terms of maintenance, I really think it's a much better idea to have a separate Incus container, since there really isn't much overhead that's involved. So I just did the apt update, and now I'm doing the install of the dependencies, which are the same dependencies that we had before with the NetAlertX container. And then after that finishes, we'll go ahead and install Docker Compose, create myself a user account. And after that, I'll come back here and we'll do the specifics for Apprise. So I've just finished installing Docker from the script on the Docker website. I've finished adding the Scott user account, and I've added Scott to the sudo and the Docker groups. At this point, I'm going to do an SU over to the Scott account, and I'll do a mkdir on Apprise. We'll cd into Apprise, and then we'll do a nano on docker-compose.yml. We insert the Docker Compose code for the Apprise application, and this one's pretty straightforward. I'm using PUID and GUID of 1001, 1001, because that's going to be the default for a container in which you've created a username, an Incus container. And then I have my time zone there you might want to modify. And then I have a config folder and then this attach folder that they require. I'm exposing this at port 80 because, again, we have a dedicated address for the Apprise container, just like we had a dedicated address for the NetAlertX container. So I'll do a Control O and enter, and a Control X to exit the nano editor. At this point, I can do a Docker Compose up -D, and it should pull the Apprise API container and launch it. Now that the Apprise container is up and running, we want to go ahead and do a Docker space PS just to make sure. And sure enough, it says that it is up and running for about a minute now. Now we're going to go ahead and do an if config, and we're going to notice that ETH0 has an address of 172.16.1.158, and that's where our Apprise website is going to be running. If we bring up our web browser and go to that address and hit enter, there we are with the Apprise API. Notice that when our Apprise application came up and running, it says that the health check failed, and it makes a suggestion to change this Apprise attach size equal to 0. But that's not really what the problem is. What the problem is that if we go back down to our container here and we do an ls-al, we're going to notice that the attach folder is owned by root as opposed to Scott for whatever reason. So we're going to need to change that, and the way we're going to change that is we're going to do a sudo chown change owner to Scott: Scott -r, which means go ahead and be recursive and go down the attach folder. And it'll go ahead and do that once I enter my sudo password. And now if I do the ls-al, it should be good. Now if I go back up here and repaint this screen, it gets rid of that error and it says that life is good. Apprise gives you several examples of how you can go ahead and send data to it, and it also gives you some endpoints that you can use for the program. But we're really not ready to use those. We're going to go off now and install Gotify and then use it with Apprise and also with NetAlertX. So let's go ahead and exit out of the Scott account on the Apprise container, and let's exit out of the root shell. And now we're back at the Inca server. On the Inca server, we're going to go ahead and do another launch, which will be identical to the one that we used for NetAlertX and Apprise, except this time we're calling this one Gotify. And just like before, we're going to perform all the same steps by doing an Incus shell over to Gotify. We're going to go ahead and do an apt update, ampersand apt upgrade -y. And as you can imagine, everything's going to proceed as it did before. I'm not going to go through these steps of installing Docker and creating my user account. We're just going to go ahead and skip over to where we configure the Gotify application. Now that I've SU'd over to the Scott account, I'm going to go ahead and do a make dir on Gotify. And then I'll cd into Gotify. And I'll do a nano on docker-compose.yml. And I'll go ahead and paste in the Docker Compose file, which is very simple. And then again, as a reminder, I'm going to go ahead and use port 80 because NetAlertX and Apprise also use port 80, but they're on their own containers, and so therefore they have their own addresses on the main LAN, which are different from the Gotify container. We do a Control-O and enter to write the file out, and a Control-X to exit the nano editor, and then we do a Docker Compose up -d, and it goes ahead and launches the Gotify container. At this point, I'm going to do a Docker PS to make sure the application is up and running correctly, and you see there under the status that it says that it is healthy. So now I'm going to do an if config, and we're going to look for the address of ETH0, which is 172.16.1.127, and we're going to head up to our web browser and go to that address. So here we are, 172.16.1.127, and we're presented with a username and a password prompt. The initial username is admin. The initial password is also admin. And we click login, and it says to change your password, and we'll go ahead and say OK. So I'm going to go ahead and click on admin up here, and then I'll provide a new password. and click change. And now my password's been changed. I like to go over to the user account and I like to go ahead and do a create user. And over here, I'm going to go ahead and create a user, Scott. And I'll go ahead and give Scott a password. And then I will make Scott an administrator. I'll go ahead and create Scott and then I'll log out. Now I'm going to log in with user Scott. Go ahead and type in my password. I'm going to go over to users and I'm going to delete the original admin user so that I have just the Scott user as an admin. You could do it any way that you want, but I typically think that a username of admin is a little bit on the obvious side. Gotify is a notification system that uses APIs, so if I go up to the top level menu and click apps, I can say create an application. And I'll go ahead and create an application that I'm going to call test. And then I can give it a description if I want. I'll just go ahead and say create. And then over here, I can look at what this token is, and I'm going to want to copy this token value because this is what's going to be needed in order to communicate back to my Gotify instance. So the idea here is that you would have several different applications of different names indicating where your notifications are coming from. If we click on all messages or we click on test, assuming there is a long list of them here, you would see messages from that particular source. To see how we can test this, we can move back over to the Apprise API and we can tell it new configuration, or we could just go into the configuration manager since I haven't configured anything before, and I can go into configuration and then I can go ahead and craft this message, which basically says communicate with Gotify and do it at 172.16.1.127, which is the address of my Gotify server instance. And then this is the API that's on the end of this. I go ahead and say save configuration, and then I can go review it, and it says that's what it is. And I can go over here to notifications, and I can say this is a test title. And here is information in the message. And we can just say send notification. And it says it successfully sent the notification. Now if we go back to Gotify, you can see this is a test title and here is the information in the message. So how do we make all of this come together? And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to apps and create a new application. And the application we're going to create is going to be NetAlertX. And we're just going to call this network status. We can spell here network status. And I'll go ahead and say create. And then we want to go ahead and copy this token here. Sometimes the copy button here doesn't work exactly right. So I like to go ahead and just copy that token. Now we're going to head over to NetAlertX, and on NetAlertX I'm going into settings, and you notice here that there are no publishers that are listed, and if we scroll down you can see that loaded plugins Apprise is listed as the first option. We want to do a control left click and then go ahead and click save, and that will add Apprise as being one of the current publishers. And sometimes you get this message that says high load on the database, click the reload button. It doesn't really have a problem here. I click the reload button and it will come back after a minute or so. Although Apprise is configured as one of our publishers, you're not seeing it listed down here in this top block, and that's because we need to scroll all the way to the bottom, and now it does show up down here in publishers. So we can click publishers, and the very first thing that we're going to want to do is turn it on So say on notification, whereas it was disabled before. The next thing that we want to do is we want to tell it where our Apprise server is. And so the Apprise host URL is the address of the Apprise server, which is 172.16.1.158. And we also have to put /notify on the end, and that's very important. That one's gotten me a couple of times. And then we have our Apprise notification URL. And so we're going to tell Apprise, we look up here at Apprise, and Apprise is, of course, at 158, but our Gotify is at 127. So our Apprise URL says, hey, communicate with Gotify, which you can find over here on 127, and then we have our application token at the end of this. Now, since we're going to use Gotify, I usually prefer to do text rather than HTML, and then I found out just by experience that it's good to have at least 2048 in terms of the number of characters to return. I mean, it wouldn't even really hurt to have 4096. And then we go ahead and click Save. Now, just as a way to test this, I'm going to go ahead and create a new Incus container, and I'm going to do an Incus launch, images, Ubuntu 2404. I'm just going to call this thing AAAAAA, and then just put it on the main LAN, because in order to be discovered by NetAlertX, it's going to have to show up on the main LAN. After a relatively short period, I noticed that it picked up another node here, and if I sort by my IPs and I go down to 149 was the address that I believe that it got, there is 149 right there, and of course it says name not found because it's not in my DNS anywhere. However, if we go over to Gotify now, you'll see that it says that there is a NetAlertX notification. A new device showed up with this MAC address at this particular date and time with an address of 172.16.1.149. And so when this new node shows up on my network, I might want to go over here and find 149, click on it, and I might want to give it a name, and I'll just call it AAAAA, and then I'll go ahead and uncheck New Device and click Save. And I could have put any more notes in there that I wanted to, and that would have worked fine as well. I'm going to go ahead and click at the top level menu, and there we go. If I look down through this list, you'll notice it will be the green one because it's now a node that we know about. It's no longer new. And in fact, if we go to the very top of this list, we see that we have 69 new devices, but 72 connected. And I think I have 2 or 3 that I defined in this list during the course of the video. There are a lot more settings and notification options in NetAlertX, and Apprise as a separate API container gives you so many opportunities to have messages or statuses sent from one system to another. And I find Gotify to be a really simple and yet very flexible mechanism as well. And just in the interest of keeping this video down to a reasonable period of time, I wished I had more time to kind of dive into things, but hopefully this whets your appetite. So in summary, I use Uptime Kuma, and it's a great tool for watching service availability on your network. So NetAlertX takes Uptime Kuma to a new level by watching for new system instances that may join your network, or for instances that go offline, which is something that Uptime Kuma will do as well. So NetAlertX supports many publishers for notifications, and Apprise, which I've covered here, is just one of the more powerful notifiers because it's capable of talking to so many different systems. And I called an Apprise instance from inside of NetAlertX to send network event notifications to my Gotify instance that I also monitor on my Android mobile device. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.